there needs to be more education surrounding employment rights, worker rights, and when you are entitled to national minimum wage, because the national minimum wage law is really quite simple.
Fashion. The glitz and glamour, extravagant fashion shows and fancy cocktail parties look fun on the surface. What isn't so fun is the tireless work required to make this a reality. Some are financially compensated for their efforts, while others are left to fend for themselves. Unpaid internships are very common in the fashion industry. Many think they're a necessary evil to gain required work experience. For others, it's a barrier to entry for those who cannot afford to work unpaid, or for those who live outside a major city where most of these jobs are.
I'm Andrew Loader, the founder of Fashion Workie, a free jobs board / careers resource platform predominantly aimed at the fashion industry. I started the platform in 2009 as a final major project while studying fashion promotion imaging at the University of Creative Arts in Epsom. Over many years, I've challenged work placement law violations on over 1,500 vacancies. There's really no such thing as an internship, because often the time you may encounter an issue or the scenario that someone will say, but it's an internship, and that really doesn't mean anything. So what you have in the law, like the real basic way of looking at it without taking a deep dive, is to say, what is the circumstance? And the circumstance is that person a worker? And if you're a worker, you're entitled to at least national minimum wage.
In the UK, the title intern means nothing on a legal basis. What does matter is if you're classed as a worker or not. Workers are entitled to the national minimum wage, whereas university students doing an internship as part of their placement year are not entitled to pay.
There isn't really any loopholes in the law. The law is actually quite relatively clean cut. The problem is taking a step back. It's the law isn't enforced well enough. If I was to call up the police and say, hey, there's a house being burgled, they'd go and investigate it. If someone reports an issue to HMRC saying there's someone working unpaid somewhere, they don't really take it seriously. What has to happen is the victim has to sort of call up, which is ridiculous really. So the person who works somewhere that was entitled to national minimum wage has to then often be the person who takes the case forward, which doesn't really compare with how we treat a lot of other laws, which is essentially third-party reporting with crimes. They just don't take it seriously enough. Businesses and a lot of people in fashion don't think they're doing anything wrong with unpaid work, especially when they think if they can't afford to pay someone, they're not really doing anything wrong because they're not exploiting anyone. I've said this a couple of times. Someone once told me, and it was incredibly poignant, this was someone that engaged a lot in unpaid recruitment for their online platform. They said, it's only exploitation if you can afford to pay. And that kind of presents this attitude of lack of accountability. I don't have to be responsible really for this problem because I can't afford to pay. I'm not doing anything bad because I can't afford to pay. It opens up to those bigger issues because then the people that can afford to then work unpaid and get the experience creates this culture of an unrealistic entry-level jobs market, because when an entry-level paid role does become available, the applicants that go for that role, the ones that have been able to gain experience and skills from working unpaid, are better suited for it, which, okay, that's just how the industry works, and we've come to understand that's how it's been for quite some time, but it disadvantages those that haven't been able to work unpaid necessarily, or haven't had the opportunities to go and work somewhere unpaid.
Even when companies aren't paying interns, there are still many reported cases of interns being treated badly and sometimes outright exploited. Some have even reported their work being used to make profit for the company.
So I'm Joseph Brimacombe. I'm a fashion student at Westminster, and I'm in my second year. So I've been really lucky to have a varied experience across, small emerging brands and then slightly higher brands. I've been at Dior very briefly, and Vivienne Westwood even more briefly. I think my time at Vivienne Westwood could be much better summarised as work experience as opposed to internships. And I think when I was starting, the distinction between the two wasn't that clear. And I think obviously for CV's sake, you can call anything an internship if you really want, obviously. Vivienne Westwood felt more like work experience because it was a shorter period of time, and Dior was a little bit longer and a little bit sort of more widespread, and it kind of continued once they'd all gone back to France and I was back in my bedroom, so that was always cool, I guess. So the first place I ever went to, I won't name because it will be my bad experience. So yeah, I was brought in to be sort of an assistant to the creative director of this brand, and I was 16 at the time and hadn't had any real experiences, so I was very, very excited and probably a little overeager, I would admit. But I went in on my first day, and it was during the lunch break that I started trying to chat to him and learn from him, and he just turned to me and said, "Don't talk to me." And like, I just remember feeling so embarrassed. And I think what I would say about internships is like, if that had happened to me now, I wouldn't put up with it. But it's so difficult when you're younger, I think, and especially because you feel like you need an internship. You feel like you need the CV names. And whilst that is somewhat true, you should never feel disrespected at an internship. You should never feel like an errand or like a coffee boy. You know, like, I think it's really important to see internships as a transaction. In the same way any job is, you sort of see it as like you work for them in exchange for knowledge or connections or, you know, just building your network and skills. So I think internships are like a transaction. I think that's really the best way to look at them if you're looking for an internship. What are you going to get out of it, and what are you going to give them? So anyway, this internship didn't last very long. It was only 4 weeks, so very, very short internship when I was 16, and it just made me look at internships so badly because I just was so mistreated and basically just felt useless the entire time. It was clear I wasn't wanted there despite them bringing me in. The head of the company was particularly horrible, and I remember thinking, is this what all fashion people are going to be like? And that couldn't be farther from the truth. I've been so lucky to meet so many incredible people. No internship should lose you money. That's a really, really important thing, I would say. I don't know if I think unpaid internships are necessarily the worst thing. Obviously, I'm speaking from a position of relative privilege to be able to do them. But I think no internship should lose you money. And I see so many other students on my course who've done internships and unfortunately have had to pay their own travel fees, food costs. So they've essentially paid to work for someone, and that doesn't strike me as a fair transaction. And I think no internship is so good that it's worth losing money for. And I think if they're letting you lose money, that shows that they perhaps don't respect you as they should.
Despite the negatives, not all internship experiences are bad. Many have led to full-time roles within the same company. Others claim they have acquired work experience that would be difficult to get otherwise.
I'm Daniel Peters, and I'm the founder of the Fashion Minority Report. At FMR, or Fashion Minority Report, we are in the business of creating inclusive workplace culture. So we work with companies in the fashion industry and the creative sector to help them understand how they can better support diverse communities, whether that's empowering emerging talent or supporting talent that already exists within their companies. We help them to develop resources and opportunities and experiences that support diverse talent. I mean, there's all the voids in the space of, you know, the lack of representation. When I think about my time at companies, I've often been one of the only black or brown people in the space. And when you are in the space, there can often be a glass ceiling that you hit. And it's not even glass, it's concrete, because glass feels like something you can smash, whereas concrete feels like you've got to really chip away at it. And so for me, thinking about my experiences, but also those which I hear of from peers in the industry, but also talent on the come up, it just made me realize that we're not doing enough as a community to create more tangible opportunities where diverse talent can really thrive. Nobody's got time to work for free, really. Like, that's like my general rule of thumb, that I don't want anything that I typically do to involve unpaid labor. You know, we've all got bills to pay at the end of the day, and we don't know what somebody's situation is, especially if they're coming from a diverse or a minority group. Actually, they might have other responsibilities that they need to cover the expense of for family or for friends or so on. And so we keep on, as an industry, going back to young talent, asking them to work for free because it's something that they can put in their portfolio. That's all well and good, but that doesn't pay my phone bill. If you're making a profit from your work, you should at least be able to afford somebody the expense of their travel and their lunch so that they're not having to put their hand into their own pocket. You know, I think when we look at that balance, it's an imbalance really. It's not supportive, it's not constructive. Actually, it wears people down because then that person probably has to get another job to counterbalance what they're doing on a daily basis. So I think it's so important that we really understand that we're not all coming from the same starting point, and that by putting some money into that person's pocket and reimbursing them for something is better than nothing, but that isn't where it should stop. When I graduated from the Fashion Retail Academy, I went to go and work at a luxury department store, and in that space I was working kind of 4 or 5 days a week, and I decided that I wanted to work in the visual merchandising team. So I went to them and said, as I'm already working on the shop floor 5 days a week kind of thing, or 4 days, can I do one unpaid day with you per week so that I can really learn and gain some experience? But I had the foresight of understanding that I wouldn't necessarily be losing out on anything because it wouldn't interfere with my paid days of work. And actually they said yes, and that gave me the opportunity to do so. So I did that for 3 months, and after those 3 months, somebody in that team put me forward for a role at a luxury British fashion house. And it was a role that I had, in my mind, 0 experience for. But actually that bit of experience that I gained, and I guess my thirst and my hunger to get into the industry, made the people at the luxury fashion house see that I would be a good fit.
Looking forward, there have been some positives to come out of a pandemic. Workers are now in a better position to negotiate, and this just might give interns more leverage. It has also created opportunities to work from home, which could reduce big travel costs for unpaid interns.
My name is Shami Adeboye, and I'm a consultant working in executive search. Every single internship I've done has been unpaid. That's about 5 internships from the age of 15 till 21. And that's at all kinds of organizations, both big and small. Some of them, I can't say I haven't learned from them. Definitely have. There's been some useful experience in that, but at the end of the day, they cost me a pretty penny at times. And they're definitely something that I personally would want to erase from the job market. I think it's a tough one because, like I said, experience is, I guess, the key. It's why anyone would really sign up for an unpaid internship. But at the end of the day, some of my internships were in central London, and that's not cheap to get to when you live outside, and even from anywhere really. So it does tally up, and I know those opportunities wouldn't be accessible to somebody who didn't have the financial support I did. I think, especially as the older I got, and the more experience I gained in the workplace, the more often I was given tasks that were akin to the ones permanent employees were receiving. Now, I guess the justification from these companies as to why I wasn't being paid for that service was it wouldn't be up to the same standard, which is fair enough. I guess in some aspects it wasn't. I wasn't there for long enough to build up that level of experience or consistency in that work, but at the same time, the tasks I was given did not differ, and they were still being used to reach similar results. So it was being classified. I was classified as a worker, essentially. I was classified as an employee, even though in the office I was called an intern, but to the outside world, I was representative of that company. So it's funny. I think it's easy for a company to say, obviously, you weren't doing the same standard of work, which you may not have been doing so, but at the end of the day, if you're given the same tasks, should the definition change?
In an industry that screams and shouts about how inclusive it is becoming, it's very amusing that these same big companies will go as far as to not even cover the travel and food expenses of an unpaid worker. Will workers' rights be better enforced in the UK? Will major companies that turn over millions in annual profits be held accountable for putting employees in illegal roles? These are questions that will only be answered with time, but hopefully the outcome will be positive.